There we go.
And welcome to the Collector Alliance. All right, Brian Rachfal, how you doing today, man? Thank you.
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine.
I'm really excited to chat today about rocket firing Fetts, and I mean, you know, we just kind of I kind of stumbled upon you, and you're like, oh yeah, you were just so nice and open, and you have such a deep understanding and experience with rocket firing Fetts. Not to, I mean, and beyond that, but you know, most people think they think of a rocket firing Fett and they think of a Boba Fett with you know, his missile on the back, right? And they also, everybody had one when they were a kid.
God, yes, you're talking about the rocket Fett syndrome.
The Mandela.
Yeah, the Mandela effect. I call it rocket Fett syndrome, but it's the same thing. Yeah. I literally talked to a guy once that thought he had one of these things, and I told him he couldn't have had one, and he was like, oh no, I had it out last week, it's in the sock drawer, I'll go get it for you. And this is a long time ago, so like early 90s. So my business partner, he said, go get it, we'll give you $1,500 for it. And so the guy, you know, oh, he's off, and you know, all right. And again, he just told us he had it out last week. He was playing with it. It's in the sock drawer. Comes back in, looks us in the eyes, his eyes go right to his feet. He shuffles over. He says, you're right, it doesn't fire. And I just thought that was so funny because, I mean, it's been one thing if it's like, oh yeah, I had this as a kid, let me go try and find it. But this was something that was just within a week. And this tells you how much so badly we wanted this thing to fire that our minds just automatically, it goes there.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm 39, so it was a little bit, about 4 or 5 years beyond me, or earlier than me. But I even knew as a young kid at like 10, I'm like, I thought, you know, growing up when I was like 10, the rocket firing Fett, I thought it was folklore, you know. Now I know it's legend.
A lot of people did. A lot of people didn't think it got out of the early design stages. The hint that something had happened is because the early collector case insert had the kit bash Fett in there. And then the second insert had the protomold in there, but we didn't know it was a protomold at the time. It looked like it was just a production Fett painted a little different. So
speaking of kit bash, I saw your website, and it's rockfallproductions.com, correct?
Rockfall Enterprises.
Rockfallenterprises.com,
yes.
Yeah, and you have a $10,000 reward.
It's 20,000 now. I haven't updated the site, but we have a Facebook page called Rocket Fett Cash or something like that, and the rewards there 20, and that's just for someone who basically turns in their neighbor, and it leads to the purchase of the piece. It's not asking. It confuses people because they think we're asking $20,000 for it, which would be really ripping somebody off. And this thing, if it exists, would be like life-changing money for somebody.
That's just a finder's fee.
That's a finder's fee. That's if you tell me your neighbor Bob has it and I go buy it from Bob, you got a $20,000 check coming to you.
Yeah.
I mean, I initially had hope that one of them might have survived, because if you look at all the different photos of them out there, it looks like they did about 4 different. The sad news is it's all one figure reworked several times. The earlier version, the first one that Jim Swearingen did, had a cape, a brown cape to it, which looks really snazzy. That disappeared early on, and the figure was rephotographed under different lighting, so it looks more steel blue-gray in the second image versus more of a grayish green. But when you look at the original transparencies that Kim Simmons saved, because Simmons brought out Roy Frankenfield's studio and saved a lot of Roy's work. And when you look at the transparencies, you can see where the paint, dimpling in the paint, matches between the 2 images. So it's just the lighting that's different.
Yeah.
And then it was reworked 2 more times, with the final version being the one that shows up heavily airbrushed on the back of the 21 back cards. And so basically the earlier versions, of course, now don't exist. We know those are gone because they've all been reworked. And then the question is did that final version survive? And according to Jim, it was fragile back then. And, by now, everything, so much has come forward and been discovered in the hobby. I would think by now, if it exists, we would find it. And my only hope for it is that maybe some janitor has it and he moved to Canada and they're outside the hobby. And maybe one day somebody will get a surprise phone call. And whether it's me or somebody else, at this point, I just would like proof of life. The picture, the figure, the current newspaper, and then it's going to be a chore authenticating it.
Yeah.
But one took such good photographs, we should be able to match the paint strokes.
And there's a lot of the transparencies out there. I actually have access to a few, and those are actually really valuable. Just those by themselves.
Both from a financial standpoint and from a research standpoint, because some of these things, that's the only way you're going to ever validate them for certain. And like I say, if this ever came forward, I have no doubt we'll know it's real or not, Bay, about several things that I've discovered in the photographs. We'll even be able to know if it's the original missile with it or not. There's little certain things, because that missile, although it looks like it's just the missile from the Shogun Raider figure, there's a little something more going on there with that missile.
Yeah, it's not the standard rocket firing Fett missile, is it?
They did for the kit bash, they did two types. There was there's a diamond tipped one that was lathed. And then there's one based off of the Shogun Warrior missile that came with the backpack, because that's what they used for the back of the figure. They took a Shogun Warrior firing mechanism from a Shogun Raider figure, and then the model shop modified it. So there's certain things that Jim did, and there's certain parts that the model shop made for him, and then he put everything together and he painted it. And so there's just certain things that we'll be able to look for. And we'll know if it really exists or not. But I have this horrible feeling that it probably doesn't. And if it does, we're going to be very disappointed about the condition of it. It's going to end up being more of an incomplete artifact where you go, okay, yay, it exists, but yeah, I mean, I've heard people out there going, oh, I know a guy will pay $1 million for it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You keep saying that, and when it shows up and it's missing its leg and the missile, you tell me you're still going to drop 7 figures on it.
Now,
it's rare, it's desirable, but I mean, in the end of all things, condition is still going to come to play.
Do you think it would be in Cincinnati if it is?
Well, the smart money would be to say yes, but I mean, I know a guy in Oregon had 4 J slots walk into his comic shop that were real. And the guy grew up in Cincinnati, but he moved to Oregon. So it could be really, realistically, it could be anywhere in the world.
And why would we keep it a secret if they had it, right? I mean, there are these black hole collections, and a lot of people are very private about their collection. Yeah. But at this point, would it be? I don't know. Maybe they would. Maybe.
I do think I've asked this to a couple people that would be in the know to just get quiet confirmation as far as you're never going to see it, but yeah, the guy's got it in his back room with his Rembrandt,
right.
And I've been assured that it is not in some black hole collection. There's a couple ideas that where it might be, if anybody might have it, but those have been kind of, those collections now been worked over by people, and there's 1 or 2 hopes out there, and after that, it just might be one of those things. And for my pocketbook, is probably the best thing that could happen, because if it does show up, I'm going to want to own this thing. So, and it's not going to be cheap. Even if it's missing a leg.
It's too bad they didn't manufacture the Boba Fett even with a little cape. It just looks beautiful.
Oh, it looks. Wouldn't that have been great?
Yeah.
But again, it's the price point of this thing. I mean, I was reading one of the books that was out there, and the guy was going to, I think it was like Ben Sheehan. He was going into how they usually only use 2 or 3 colors on an action figure because every color they put in there costs money. So they would rely on the base colors, having the 2 or 3 different colors of plastic, and then 2 or 3 colors added to that to get you what you wanted. The Boba Fett had 5 colors to it. It didn't just have the firing mechanism, it had 5 colors.
Yeah.
This is going to be their Cadillac. And
yeah,
I can understand at that point to say, okay, now let's put a cape to it. You're really asking a lot. And that's one reason why I don't like, I sent you a picture of the one of the alternate paint scheme J slots, not J slots, the hand painted L slot. It has a lot of orange and white on the back. I mean, if that was a concept piece to try and sell that concept to Kenner, I could see why they would have said no there as well. You already had 5 colors. Do you want to go, what, 6? I mean, how much did they were already giving us everything they could give us on that, basically.
So with the rocket firing Fett, they were manufacturing this in what in the late 70s, and while they were manufacturing Battlestar Galactica had with the child. Is that right? It was same time. So that's
been, well, I think this would have been for a 79 release. So they've been working on this around, they would have been working on this around 78, throughout 78, I would think. And from what I understand is as this was going through its stages of development, their attorneys were already aware of the problem that Mattel was having with their toys. Because Mattel, they tried to salvage things by putting warning labels on there to stop the kids from having accidents, and apparently that still wasn't enough, and that's why they ended up retooling the L to a J. They wanted to put a safety feature on there, and then they started having trouble with the J slots because there are 2 stem variations on the J slot. There's a long and a short stem. And I was talking to one of the testing technicians, and he remembered that. And he says, oh, yeah. He says the long stems are breaking. And he remembers one of the other technicians there going, dear me, dear me. He said, this is not going to work. And he put it just that way. And he says then they were testing the short stem ones, and they seemed to hold up better. But it didn't matter. The child died, and the attorneys for Kenner, who were already looking and itching for an excuse, used that to put their foot down. Because in Sheehan's book, he released this with Kim Simmons. A very interesting read in there. The guy from legal was saying that he would have put the kibosh on this very early on, but he felt he would have been fired and replaced, and then the new guy would eventually put the kibosh on it. So they were like just vultures waiting in the wings basically to do what ultimately, and it kills me to say it, the right thing. They probably saved some kids' lives. If the Battlestar toy was causing problems, there's no reason to assume that this one wouldn't have caused a problem too. And the J slots, if they broke, you had a sharp piece of plastic that could have gotten into a kid's eye. And then you also lost the safety mechanism. So now you've been back to the thing firing accidentally. There was just no real way to make the thing safe.
Question for you. Have you ever, this is the stupidest question. Have you ever shot off a rocket?
Oh God, yes.
How far?
I have fired every one that's come through except the last couple years. I mean, once they started getting above 100 grand.
Now you are. But how?
But even when they're in the 20-30 range, I was like, this is what insurance is for. And so firing the L slots is not a problem. You can sit there firing them all day.
I mean, is it kind of like
as far as the design goes, the L slots are very durable. There's no way you can really damage an L slot. It's just the safety mechanism not being there.
Right.
The J's, I will fire when they come in. I fire them once just for the novelty of it.
Yeah.
But they really were going to be a bad toy because the redesign has the slot very small and snug to the lever, which is also now very small. So it's hard. So you have to use the missile really to push it down in place. And if you just release it, it just drags up the groove and the missile just kind of falls. It's a lousy toy. You have to get creative on how to fire it. And what you do is you use the missile to push it all the way down to the bottom. Make sure it's out of the way to the tab. Say a prayer. And then what you do is you flick it off the bottom of the toy, and the rocket will go. I shot one 7-8 feet.
Wow.
Yeah. That was back in, and I have a witness. If anybody wants to doubt, I've got a witness. He remembers it to this day. That was the last time I fired my personal one.
Yeah.
He wanted to see it. And so I told him, I said, okay, this will be the last time I fire this. And it went 7-8. It hit the wall and it shot right back off. And we're like, whoa.
Could you imagine if it goes down the vent or something like that?
Oh, don't even. Well, no, we didn't have that type of an issue, but yeah, no, God, no. But that was like a once in a lifetime thing. Generally, they go about 3 feet, you know, and trying to get that out of an L slot is difficult. Those go about maybe a foot or two.
Yeah.
You can get 3 feet if you want to sit there and fire it about 30 times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, no, I've played with them. I still will fire an L slot without a problem. I won't fire a J anymore. I will not fire the protomold.
Yeah.
The protomold is very thin at the top, that's a little thin. It's only a thin piece of plastic at the top that holds the plunger in place. And it's got a strong spring, and the plastic is fragile. So I've only fired it once, and that was by accident, and I shot my wife with it.
So
she still talks about today. She'll point to her thumb. She says, that's where I got hit with it. And I'm like, you know what? You should take a table out at a convention, tell your story, sign autographs. I got shot with a protomold.
That's fantastic, man. That's actually fantastic.
It is. I mean, and at least I got to see it fire once because I got that one through Derby, and Derby is like, don't fire it. And when you fire an L slot, it makes like a little ding sound. The protomold makes a real sickening snap. I thought it broke it.
Ooh.
My heart had just squeezed up into my chest.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at this, and I was like, I'm trying to will reality to give me what I need to see here, because if it's broken, I mean, this is years of therapy, and you might not ever recover from it. And it was fine. And I checked it for like about 2 weeks later under a magnifying glass. Okay, it's all right. It's okay. But it really made a nasty little snapping sound. And I'm just like, you know, and if she'd not been there, I think that also would have gone about 6 feet and hit the wall. That it's got a larger spring to it. And so you can see why on the L's and the J's, they redesigned the spring where it doesn't have as many coils to it. So it doesn't have that force.
Well, if it knocked her finger off, you could always sell the rocket and probably cover the expenses of sewing a finger back on.
Well, it didn't knock the finger. It's not that strong. But I mean, it just startled everybody because I had to see if it locked, because the protomold, it's not very angular at the latch. It's rounded a bit. So I was curious to see if it would actually hold. And then it brought up the other question is, if it doesn't hold, how is this? When we later found out it was the photo sample, how did Roy photograph this thing? I mean, there's no way he could have locked it in place. Well, under magnification, you find traces of wax back in the spring. So that's how Roy held it in place. He put wax in there. And you can see in the hand where there's beeswax in there as well, where he had the blaster.
Okay, so you have your main photo, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 variants there.
Okay, let me go.
Of the rocket firing Fett.
Is this the photo that has the kind of the brown background?
Yeah, like a tannish, pinkish, mauve brown. Yeah, it's a very unique color, actually. It starts with.
Is this one with the question marks on it or not?
No question marks.
Oh, I know the photo. Okay, that's my homage to Kearns's 9 Holy Grails. Yeah, that's pretty much the ensemble I bought around 2013. with the exception of the painted L and the J slot, which I think were from my collection.
So the furthest left has a very the rocket is pretty tall. He does.
That's the proto-mold. That's the proto-mold. I had to learn my lesson. I was not going to latch it for the photograph.
Okay, and then this yellow one with the kind of
we don't know what's going on with that yellow one there. It's one of a kind, and it was discovered with that missile at the time, and that was mid-90s. We didn't know the proto-mold existed. Everyone assumed that was a first shot like everything else. So the presumption was that missile was a prototype missile. The problem is we now know with the proto-mold, which would have come first, they already had the four-sided missile design locked in. So I don't know what's going on with that missile. It might have been just something that whoever had it put in there so he'd have a projectile. Or it could be that the proto-mold was done in-house at Kenner. That yellow one being a first shot would have been done overseas in Hong Kong. So maybe they hadn't tooled that missile yet. And so maybe that was just kind of to check function. We really don't know what's going on with that anymore. Doesn't it look neat?
Yeah. Oh, it looks really, the whole thing looks awesome. I mean, just beautiful. And then you have the blue, white, yellow L slot. Tell us about that one.
You're talking about the multicolor one with the white arms?
Yep.
Yeah, well, it's another one of a kind piece, and it's a first shot.
Yeah.
But its claim to fame is that it is unique, and that's of all the first shots out there, it's the only one that has white arms.
Wow.
So yeah,
okay.
That is one of my favorite pieces. It's gorgeous. My wife ruined it though, because she calls it the oh god, what does she call it? Like it's the quilt fit or something like that. She looks at it as a patchwork of different colors. So it's like, okay.
I love it. I love it.
I really, to me, it's one of my favorite pieces, and that's one of the ones I will fire. You can't harm it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's on my bucket list to fire a rocket from a rocket firing Fett. Never thought that would be on my bucket list, but you ever get down to California, I think we can make that happen. I mean, all right.
Because like I say, unless you're going to drop it on the floor and step on it, you're not going to break one of these L's. They're very well built.
That is so
and thank God, because I showed one to a lady friend of mine back about 95, trying to, impress her, trying to not be a geek, but, still, oh, hey, and oh my God, she's like, oh, does the helmet come off?
No, the helmet.
I can attest, these things are very, very well built. So the one next to that is
unpainted, right?
It's an unpainted first shot, but it's
beautiful,
a gray one. And what's nice about that one there is that they've already added the copyright to the back of the leg. So this is further along. What's missing from this particular photo is the standard blue-gray.
Right.
It doesn't have the copyright in the back of the legs. I felt it was going to, yes, that one there. Exactly. I felt it was going to ruin the composition. So I left it out, because if I did shoot it, it would have been the one you've got there. That would have been in the image.
That's so fun. We'll get back to that.
We'll get back to that one there. But these gray ones, there are only 3 known to the hobby.
Right.
And they were found by Steve Denny around 99. And they were found with 8-sided missiles that had ejector pin marks to them. But because everyone assumed that L slots had to have 4-sided missiles, they kind of got broken up. And even the photo I took here has a 4-sided missile in there. That was the information we had at the time, but new information came to light. And I was examining a transparency of one of the Fetts they used for the catalog images that has Boba Fett walking on the red sands with lightning falling behind him. And the transparency allows you to blow a postage stamp image up really large. And I always thought it was a rocket Fett, and it is. It looks like it's a painted L, but the missile they have in that painted L is an 8-sided missile, not a 4-sided missile, and it has the ejector pin mark to it.
Interesting.
So if they had already made that,
do all 3 have that 8-sided missile?
Well, they were found with the 8-sided missiles. They were broken up. People didn't understand what was supposed to be there. I've restored mine now to an 8-sided missile. That's the way it should be.
Gotcha.
The other 2 are paired now with 4-sided missiles. And there's some ambiguity as far as, well, they don't show up in photography. Who really knows? And you know what? It's your piece. You can do what you want with it. But if you're asking me my professional opinion, I would say that early photograph, because the photography was done very early on. They would have to get everything out there. If they have a painted L and they have an 8-sided missile in there, you know, the copyrights were added after that point. So these grays, I think the reason they were found with the 8-sided missiles with the ejector pin mark was because that's how these figures would have been released to the public had they not retooled it for the J slot.
Okay. So you're saying the unpainted does not have a copyright on it.
The unpainted, most of these first shots don't have copyright. All of them, with the exception of the gray one, do not have copyright. The proto mold does not have copyright.
Gotcha.
Yours, check the back legs, it won't have copyright.
It does not. No.
And that's how they all are. So even the painted L's are like that. They don't have copyright in the back of the legs. So whatever was going on with those gray Fetts, they were getting close to production because they already added that copyright. That means the next step would have basically been to to start adding the paint with the mask and getting away from the hand painted stuff.
Do you know if the mold exists for the rocket firing Fett? Do we know where that is?
I have no idea if that exists or not, and I almost hope that information never comes forward, because that's going to cause, that then you're going to start having rumors going out there as far as, oh, now they can just start making these things. So I hope that one doesn't exist. The hobby has enough trouble with all the repos and stuff that's out there, and for the good of it, the bad of it. I mean, that one guy did finally do a kit bashed Fett, and thank God, because at least now there's a standardized one out there that you can own and enjoy. But when it comes to this other stuff, it's confusing people, because they do make. There's a guy out there that makes the yellow Fett, the multicolor Fett, the gray Fetts, and now when people see these, they think these things are replicas, and I'm like, dude, no, this is where these other pieces are based off of.
That's a line we don't cross for sure.
Yeah,
the next Fett over is, it looks like it's hand painted. It appears to be.
Yeah, the next 2 are hand painted. You've got 2 of the 4 or 5 painted L's there.
Okay, those are.
One is painted in non-production paint scheme, and the guy who did that, if my memory serves, he painted up a 12-inch Boba Fett, really nice, to present to Kenner to try and say, hey, look, we could do more for these people on these toys. And Kenner basically said, yeah, no. So I really wonder if some of these concept pieces were just that, concept pieces, to try and say, hey, look, we could do more. Because otherwise it does bring up a question as far as why were they painting these things up in such exotic colors. So again, they had the color scheme pretty much locked at the proto mold.
Yeah. Gotcha.
And so what we finally get in production, that color really matches the proto mold color. So it really does make you kind of wonder what was going on here. But they're very nice. They're neat. There are a couple out there that they're quietly known to exist. Yeah. I have permission to say they exist, but that's about all I have permission to say on them. They're still, so that gets back to what we're trying to say. Black hole collections, people want to just kind of, sometimes they like the novelty of having something that no one else knows about, or they're afraid it might hurt market value if people know about it. They want to keep it fresh. I totally get where they're coming from, but I'm a knowledge guy. I want the information out there. There's a rich. We're very fortunate. I mean, for a figure that wasn't produced, there's more reference material to go on than there are for the stuff that was produced.
Yeah. And then, so then you have this J slot, which looks like basically a standard Kenner Boba Fett.
That's what the figure was going to be had it been released. So yeah, it's very close there.
That was the final. That was it. That's
the way it was when they pulled the plug.
Interesting. Yeah. So he was there. And this, he looks just like a standard Kenner, except for he has, and that's probably one of the more popular of the variants, or the most popular, most desired of the variants. I mean, personally, I prefer the unpainted or the light gray.
They go back and forth. They do go back and forth. They're starting to, nowadays. I think that's probably the one that's going to be the most expensive, because when you look at the auction record, the standard L slot, the unpainted ones, they seem to come up 1 or 2 a year without a problem. But there's been several years since a nice J has come up, and the last damaged one that had some wear to the chest, the stem on the back for the J was broken. It was, I think, it graded like an AFA 50 or a 60. It brought like over 200,000.
Wow! And you have one for sale, don't you?
Yes, I do have one for sale. We got to get it into AFA to find out where it comes down. I'm hoping to get an 80 out of it. It's really nice, but it's got a little bit of imperfections, and I think I get an 85. I'll be very happy. But an 80, I think, is where it would be a fair assessment for it. So I'm hopeful. So yeah, that'll be coming up for sale once we get it graded.
And then this next one, it's kind of it's like a tan or a peach with the black torso.
Yeah, the owner refers to it as black and peach, a peach color. He refers to it as the peach Fett.
The peach.
And that, what's so nice about that one there's several things that make it nice, but the big one, and you don't really think about this, but all of the first shots for the Boba Fett are rocket firing, except this one, which was created not in 78, but in, I think it was like 1981, because Kenner needed to bring a new manufacturing plant on in Hong Kong. And so the engineer that was in charge of doing all this had them create this to check to see if their molds would work in their line. And so the letter that comes with it, it states that it was created in the 80s. So this is an Empire Strikes Back figure.
Okay.
And he calls it both a first shot and an engineering pilot.
Gotcha.
Nice, because they either or. And from what I've been told, the engineering pilot basically means that they have the engineers standing in the production line instead of the normal people who are going to be running it. And then after that, they do another run, which is a production pilot run. So this means the head honchos were there supervising this figure being created, but it's also, because it is what it is, it's also a first shot. So it's kind of that duality there, which makes it really nice. And I think it's gorgeous. I really do think it's gorgeous. And people have been trying to get my friend to sell it. And he's like, he was briefly trying to sell it a few years ago for like about 65K, and people are like, oh no, it's only worth 35. But now he's turned down offers, I mean, serious offers well above the 65. And so sometimes when these things come up, you got to know when to jump on them. You can't play that's a little too expensive game, because sometimes once you miss your opportunity, it's gone. It does not come back around. And a couple guys are now very disappointed on that.
Yeah. And then the final Fett, what is that?
The final Fett is my Vindication bonus. That's the actual one I got in the mail from Kenner. I still have the little thing that says, "Sorry, kid, you'll put your eye out." That was mine from my childhood.
That was
and yes, that's the one from my childhood. And to be able to stick it in that photo, that's kind of the reason your figure got bumped. It was going to make everything too long. Sorry. I had to stick it in there, because now I look at it, I can see the figure I had as a kid, along with all I had to do that. I had to do it.
That's so cool. Man, you kept him in great shape.
Well, I didn't play with them too much, because a couple months later they came out in the stores and they were making them in a darker gray. And so I bought one of those to play with, and this one I kept because of the color difference. But you can see how close it is to the J slot. These things are from the front, they're identical. You cannot tell them apart.
Right.
The only way, well, that's not true. I can tell you a J versus the production one from the front for the yellow. The J slots have more yellow to the orange. It's more of a yellow orange, where the production ones are orange. That's the only way you can tell. The colors, that's how close we were.
Gotcha. Yeah, you can see that. You can see the orange and the yellow for sure.
Yeah, I think there's a slight shade difference on that. But the picture I sent of you of the one that we have for sale, you can definitely see it there where it's more yellow. And that's not a trick of the photography. That's how they look. And that's how I knew that one was real. Because, I mean, here's a story I'd like to share with you because we've all been there. The guy calls you and says, hey, look, I had one of these as a kid. I played with it, and we've already discussed that, that usually doesn't pan out. Well, I had this guy called a couple years ago, and he tells me he was on the Disney Channel watching The Mandalorian, and I guess they did something with Steve Sansweet, and he was showing his rocket Fetts off in the collection. And this guy says, I think I had one of those as a kid. And I'm like, yeah, okay, and I gave him my typical thing as far as, they didn't get out, and if he's got one, it's probably a replica. And very seriously, he's like, well, I was 4 years old. He says, they were making replicas in 1980. And that was kind of the record scratch moment. But then I asked him the follow-up questions of, well, did your family live in Cincinnati? Any Kenner connections? And then this is where things started going sour, because he's like, well, no, he grew up in Oklahoma and California. So this doesn't make sense, but I like to be kind to people. You don't want to be, you want to be kind. Kindness is free. So I said, you know what, send me some photos. I'll let you know. And I'm already composing my Dear Sir letter in my head for this. But I tell him I don't want just a shot of the backpack. I want shots of the shoulder, the knee pads. I want to check the color out. So he sends over the photos, and as soon as I looked at the color of the orange, I was like, oh God, this thing probably is real. And I looked at the back, and yeah, it was whatever stem type it was, because he had two of them. Whatever stem type it was cut precisely, because the long stem is got a very sheer cut to it, and the short stem, it angles a bit. And whatever this one was, it was cut right for the stem variation. The color was right. And so then it became, how did this happen? Because he is swearing there's no Kenner connection. And he's initially telling me he thinks his dad got him from the store, which I can't see happen. There's very few things that you can be really certain about in life. You got your death, taxes, and rocket Fetts were never released. You got them through Kenner channels, but nothing came out of Maple Plains. The stuff was never shipped there.
Yeah.
As one guy put it, you can't ship what doesn't exist. They were all destroyed at Kenner. So how does he get one? So I started talking to some other collectors about it, and we're trying to bend ourselves into pretzels here, trying to justify how this could have gotten out, because we all agree there's no way this got into the stores. So it had to get out through the mail order. But how does that happen? And one guy's like, well, General Mills was just down the block. Maybe an executive walked over, left a couple there. And then after these things are being sent out, the non-firing ones, the guy finds them and says, oh, hey, Bob, these should go out too. And they're joking about how it probably still showed up with a letter saying it didn't fire, and all these things we're trying to figure out. And it had a real simple Occam's razor. What happened? The guy's father was an investment banker. And the reason they were bouncing between California and Oklahoma is he's raising money for oil wells. His investor, one of them, was from Hong Kong. He had relations to the guy who owned the manufacturing plant, I guess this was Cater, who made these things for Kenner. and he got them directly from there, and it was custom when you'd come in to bring a gift.
Sure.
They bring really nice gifts. He was saying how his father would sometimes get things of jade and stuff. This was a joke gift. He gave them to him and said, "Hey, these are for you." He says, "They're worthless. They're not going to make them now."
Wow. Wow. Wow.
And then it gets better. They go back to Hong Kong because for a couple of years, the family actually moves back over there and the figures go back over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they come back to the United States. So that's how, after 30 years, I finally got a phone call from somebody who said he had one as a kid and he played with them. He knew how to fire them. He knew that you had to snap the little lever off the bottom of the figure to get it to work. And that's why I knew he did play with them once he told me that. So go figure, huh?
That's so cool. That's so cool, man. So, and this one that I so
yes,
it's painted.
You're rocket firing, non-rocket firing.
Yeah, light blue, gray.
Yeah.
This is one with a no firing mechanism.
Yeah, for some reason they assembled some of them without the mechanism, and I'd love to know the story behind that.
Yeah, yeah, and this one went through your collection at a certain point.
This one, I had that for a while. That goes back to, as I explained to you, that belonged to Justin Kearns at one point in time. So that's part of that's one of the 9 holy grails out there. So it went to him, it went to another guy, it went to me, and then I don't know how many hands it went through after that, but there it is. So that's a 1 of 1. In 30 years, I've never seen another one like that.
Really?
Although we've both been told more were made.
Right.
Where are they? And I think that's where people get confused. They talk about what existed, not what survives.
Right.
And I find that gets to be a problem talking about a lot of these things because there's a big difference between the two.
Wow.
So that's a nice piece there. It's very nice.
You've gone through several, this piece, the provenance, and here we are. I mean, full circle, it's really incredible when there's only so few quantity of these items. I mean, there's 100 to 150 we discussed before.
I think we can. We're probably best to split that somewhere around about maybe 120, 25. I think it's when I read my numbers. I don't think it's quite that high. And here's the thing, again, devil's in the details. How many of these figures are we double counting? Because I was ready to say that was the second one out there. Now we're back to 1. And I tried to
buy this one because of the markings on the chest, which brought him probably.
Yes, yeah. The marking, there are melt marks on that figure.
Melt marks, yeah.
That are very obvious to tell. And another way you can also tell some of these figures are the same ones too is that they're aging. They're getting little blemishes in there, so you can actually check the age spots on there on some of these figures too. If you have good enough photographs to do so, that's another way. But what I'm trying to say is that when I've done these lectures with a couple of the guys, we generally will say there's about 70 to 80 L slots out there. But the problem is, I don't know if some of those are being double counted. And when I tried doing a list, I tried assembling a registry of these a couple of years ago, and it was a lot easier to find all the J's out there than the L's. I only could find about half of the L's that were presumed to exist. So I don't know if that's an omen that's suggesting we're overcounting pieces, or basically some of these are locked up in collections. I know there's at least 2 that I have not seen again. One is the Tomart example that was a short shot that didn't have fingers. And another one was one that I sold that had a marking on the head that was like an A or something. And those have disappeared. So I know they're out there, but they haven't shown back up. So it's possible some of these, 70 to 80 are locked in collections.
So cool. Wow.
So I do hesitate when it comes to, the numbers. I like to go on the lower side because I think we might be miscounting some stuff.
So and there's, tell us about the single carded version that's out there.
Oh, the Toy Fair mock-up.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting one there. They had it looks like they had a template for how they wanted it to look, how they wanted the card to look like. But those are very fragile because basically they're hand assembled. So it looks like what they did for time constraints is they did a photostat of that, mounted the photostat on thick cardboard, and then with double-sided tape, they took a J-slot and stuck it in there. But what's interesting about that, when you see the photograph of it at Toy Fair, you see stacks of the back of the cards on the table, and they already have the rocket firing mechanism covered up on the back of the 20 back cards. And you'll notice the difference between the mock-up, where it has language on there saying "Do not fire towards your face." On the Toy Fair mock-up, the photostat, that's already been blacked out. So Chris Jagoulis' theory is that they had already moved away from, well, just based on the evidence you see there, they used a J-slot because they needed a representation for the figure, but already at that point in February, they had already moved away from the rocket firing concept. But that's the actual surviving example that was used at that year's Toy Fair. And somebody asked for it, and they gave it to them.
So that bubble has a stem. The bubble, it doesn't look like it wasn't heat pressed, and the bubble doesn't look like it has
the bubble is, whatever they do with the bubble is a handmade bubble for that, and the figure actually has a little cushion, a little plastic cushion behind it to hold the backpack in place and the missile.
Interesting.
So it's very elaborate. What it lacks is the little orange stand that it should have beneath the feet there.
And that would be a one-of-one piece as well.
That's a one-of-one piece there, yeah. As I explained, I was agonizing for years whether to pick it up or not, but I hate to say this because let's face it, this piece is the holy grail of things. But if I had bought it for what they were asking for it, I would have had to sell my J-slot, and my J-slot's in perfect condition. And that one, by virtue of the fact that it was a sales sample, there's glue in the hand where they put the blaster so it wouldn't fall loose in the card. And the little tab in the back is stressed a bit. And at the time they were telling me photostats fade. So I just could never get behind it. But now I really kind of regret it in the end. Sometimes, again, you can't miss your opportunity when it's there. You have to just sometimes jump on it, or maybe just not be too much of a snob, basically.
He brought it on Pawn Stars, though, didn't he? The
owner? Yeah, the owner of it did bring it on Pawn Stars, and Rick should have, for what he got out of it eventually, Rick should have paid the $100,000 and just the $100,000, 150, whatever he was offer, whatever the offer, he should have just paid it because he would have done very well with that.
He probably didn't.
That's not his thing.
Yeah, he probably didn't understand or know or have the love for Star Wars that he could, if he did, he might have.
Well, he still offered him $100,000 for it. So I'll give him credit for that because I think the guy was asking 150, and he offered him 100, which surprised me. I'm like, whoa, okay. Because sometimes his offers can be on the lower side, but that was still a very fair offer, and for what he got, the guy paid for it, he would have done well, but he did better holding his guns. And sometimes you just have to do it with these pieces. You got to know what you got.
I mean, if a rocket firing Fett, can fetch 250 with pretty much ease nowadays, I would imagine that card. I mean,
you can imagine the offers that have probably already been turned down on that thing because it's in the collection. I don't think it's going anywhere.
I would think, right? You would think. Yeah, I don't know. Goodness gracious.
It's serious money for those for pieces like that. Yeah. So but it's nice that it exists. I mean, the snob in me says, "Oh God, it wouldn't be better if it was an actual proof card." you know, but that's asking a little too much of the world, I think.
Right.
It is what it is, and the novelty is it, and it shows you how quickly they would throw together these things, and they would do it all ad hoc just to get it done and get it there, just to kind of serve the purpose.
Yeah. And so, Brian, you've been collecting for what? I mean, obviously since you were a kid, but I think there's a delineation mark. I think some kids grew up playing with the toys and then turned into collectors. And do you know what I mean? But
it was in two phases. I grew up playing with this stuff, and then when I got to 16, you know, you get to that point you want to do other things. So I kept my action figures, but I sold everything else. I wanted to get a gold coin, and that I had been admiring for a while. Ended up buying a high definition television, not a high definition television, but a what do you call it? A stereo VHS recorder and a monitor to go with it at the time. You know, you get your teenage years, things change.
Yep.
And I didn't start getting back into collecting probably until my early 20s, when I started missing the stuff, but I started missing the packaging. And I found out people still had it, so I started buying the 12 backs for myself. And eventually, when I started getting into business, I started at the time I was selling non-sport cards. I had a love of non-sport cards, but the stuff I wanted to sell, you couldn't find. You can't go out there and find a box of Gilligan's Island on a drop of a hat. So we had to have inventory that you could replenish. And so I looked to my love of Star Wars. And that's kind of when I went professional, and my collecting also got more professional, and I was buying better pieces at that time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And when did you acquire your first rocket firing Fett?
Well, I got that probably around mid-90s from Darren Muir at the Earth.
Wow.
And this is so far back. At the time I bought it, he was the only one known with a 4-sided missile. There were no other missiles in the hobby. The hobby was that early on. And I remember I paid like 3 times the value of the figure just to get it with the missile at the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was, and then it was right after that they discovered the J slots. So my J, the one in that image there, also is about mid-90s, probably around 96 or so. So I've had that with me quite many years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Smart buy.
Yeah, it was. I had no idea where the prices were going, though. I mean, people were laughing because that J, I'll tell you, because in 96, I think I paid $2,500 for it. And I was telling people, you wait, one day these things are worth 10 grand, and they were laughing at me.
Yeah.
But I had no idea we'd be looking. When I see that one go at Hakes broken, AFA 50 or 60, and it goes for 204,000. I'm just like, you know, we're in a whole different world.
It's a different ball game now.
Yeah, it is. I used to
told my parents. So I was very young, and I would go down to the antique stores, and I remember finding, you know, I was able to pick stuff up, you know, as much as I could. And I was at an antique store, and I vividly remember this. There was a Biker Scout and an Emperor's Royal Guard on Jedi cards, and they were $20. And I said, hey, let me get these. And my family just said, nah. And I'm like, I said, guys, I promise you they'll be valuable. But I couldn't convince them. And, you know, allowance money only went so far. And I was always trying to coax my dad into collecting with me, because I'm like, hey, Dad, I promise you this will be a good investment. And I was just obsessed with it. I had everything lined up and displayed. And, you know, I had my toys, but Star Wars was displayed, you know, that displayed the Star Wars. You
wanted to add some sealed examples to that collection.
Yeah, I mean, I did.
Yeah, well, who doesn't? But yeah, convincing your parents is, yeah.
But everything was different then too, you know. Letty. I remember talking to collectors. You know, I was a good 10 years younger than the average collector at that time. So when I did get to speak with the collector, they were kind of like, who is this kid, you know? And they're still that way because I'm still younger, but they would say, yeah, stay away from Lily Letty, stay away from Tri-Logo, worthless. That stuff's worthless.
The Uzes,
yeah, stay away from that stuff, you know. And goodness gracious, I mean, it's things changed when I got back into collecting heavy about 6-7 years ago. I was like, whoa, everything switched, and oh my gosh, I was right. I mean, everything has quadrupled or you know, increased in value by 10 since I was collecting, you know. And I'm able to, you know, build the collection and amass the collection that I want now. And, you know, being an adult, and goodness gracious, I'm blessed enough to have a rocket firing Fett go through my hands, and it's so cool. And then you're able to backtrack it to you, and it's such a small world. I mean,
I love being able to put provenance to these things.
Yeah, it's really incredible. It really is truly remarkable. It really is a piece of history. And dude, you know, we're 50 years away from these things being 100 years old, you know.
I feel old enough as it is. Okay.
I know, but I mean, my kid will be able to hold some of this stuff and say, this is 100 years old. I might not be able to, you know, I'm 39, I'd be 89, maybe, God willing, but you know, if he'll be able to, more than likely, you know, he'll be 50 years old and he'll say, these are 100 years old, 100. And we're not, I mean, it's incredible, a century.
I have to wonder what the Kenner, the ex-Kenner employees think about all of this. Because I mean, for them, when they were making all this stuff, it was just, you know, it was a Friday afternoon. They're worried about lunch, what they're doing that evening.
It was like manufacturing, you know, Apple product. Like,
exactly. They had no idea they were working on history.
No,
you know, like when Swearingen, when he's making the kit bash Fett, he didn't know he was working on the, you know, the Picasso of his age. I mean, it's just something to put together, get it done, move on, and you know, you just sometimes don't know the moment when the moment's happening to you.
It's true. Yeah, that's when the greatest moments happen, though, huh?
Sometimes they do, and then you look back and go, "Wow," you know. Yeah. So, yeah, it's
Well, you have another piece too. You have the only known existing power of the Force Boba Fett.
Oh yeah. That's the photo sample that was used in the catalog.
Yeah.
Well, let's put it this way: thank God for Kim Simmons, because when he photographed all that stuff, he kept all that stuff, and that's all the reason all that stuff exists. I think everything from that image exists except the IG-88, which was given away to a neighbor or something, because the kid liked IG-88.
Gotcha.
Now, what are the chances that survived? But you know, he kept everything else, and so yeah, that was a piece that when I finally got it, I just could not believe it. I keep going by the showcase, and I mean, for a couple of years, it was just, oh God, there it is. Just the reality that I finally got my hands on it. It wasn't working. But yeah, that's another very nice piece.
Is that a standard Kenner package with the waffle pattern?
No, it's like all the mock-ups. They're all hand glued. The blisters, I think, are all hand cut.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the ones with the figures, probably because of the off-gassing, the ones over the figures are turning yellow, but the ones over the coin are still staying clear.
Okay.
Yeah, and with some of these things, I've had a few of the other mock-ups come through, and you can see where they've been remounted several times. The glue gets dry, falls off, and you have to kind of press it back on.
Wow.
Fortunately, this has not happened to me with the Fett. I'd probably cry if it came off. But when I bought it, they made a nice AFA case for it. That it's not AFA graded, but they made a case that was really so tight and snug to the figure that it just gently pushes down on that blister, so there's no way that's going to move or shake in there. But
right.
But because it's so tight, I don't want to take it out and try and take a photograph. I want to leave it in there.
And it shouldn't yellow, considering there should be some air flow with it.
But it is. They all, and that's sadly an authenticating trait of an authentic mock-up. The blister is going to be yellowing. The coin blister will be clear.
Yeah.
If the blister is not yellowing, then that's
the mock-ups. There's this kind of phenomenon where the coin blister is clear, remains clear, and the bubble that covers.
And that's why I think it has to do with the off-gassing, with the figure being in there. You got different types of plastics, and something doesn't want to get along very well.
Wow, I get you. Yeah.
I mean, to me, that makes only sense. I don't know. I'm not a chemist. I mean, there's some people out there that could explain it with more detail, but that just seems to be. It seems to me it's just because they would have used, I would assume, the same plastic to make both blisters.
Yeah.
So why is one not changing color and the other is? So that just, but I don't know. Who knows? Maybe they did use different plastic for the coins. That could be another reason too. I mean, there's some things we're just not going to ever get answers to, I don't think.
Probably not. I mean, and the time is nigh. I mean, if we do want those answers, they've already been answered, or those final questions need to be asked.
They need to be answered now, because the people that gave us these toys, they're getting on in age, and we're getting on in age, but they already had us by 20, 30 years. So yeah.
Well, that's why, I being 39, I'm like, okay, I want to help bridge the gap between Gen X and Gen Z as much as I can, because I'm right in between Gen X and millennial. I'm actually what's called a zennial. There's these.
Oh, Jesus. Okay. There's a name for everything nowadays.
I identify as a Gen X.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not going to argue on that point there.
I'm like, no way, I'm a millennial, man. But no, really, there really is a thing called a zennial, and because we don't fit the mold, the classic mold of a millennial, and technology wasn't what it was for us growing up. We have the same technology as Gen X, this very small gap. So it pushes us. They're like, they're not quite millennials. But they're not quite Gen X. So there's just this weird thing. Anyway,
we live in weird times.
Yeah, I know, but Gen Z is starting to pick up vintage. They see vintage as being awesome and cool. They do modern stuff, right? But they need to be educated, and they need the information.
Yeah, and that's the reason I was glad that you reached out on this, because like with these specifically with these rocket fits, a lot of information is being lost.
It is,
and a lot of it too, because there are, like I say, there are replicas being made out there, and people, without doing their due diligence, they're thinking things only exist as replicas when the real pieces are out there. In the old days when I was doing this, you'd go to Rebel Scum and look at the forums. You'd go to Gus's site, the Star Wars Collector Archive, and most of these pieces we're discussing here are on the archives. There's a lot of follow-up information on there, like the protomold. There's a whole section that's on there for that, and but people don't. The old school, they knew if something new came into the hobby, that was the go-to. They'd go there, but now they're not. And you want to preserve this. So hopefully, someone watching this now knows that, hey, if you need more information, you can go there, or you can reach out to me through my website. I guess I should say rockfalenterprises.com there.
Yep.
and and we can help out with information.
Yeah, and you're so approachable, man. Not everybody is not everybody is as
I try to be.
It's great, it's you I mean, from day one when we got on that phone call, I was like, this guy's amazing. He's sharing so much information, and it's a slew, and some people want to lock information up in a vault, and I'm like,
that becomes problematic. It helps them in their endeavors, but basically it's really shortchanging the community at large.
Yep, for long term. Once they can't pass on that information, it is gone. It is lost. And for example, if we didn't have the history and the provenance of certain pieces, say the rocket firing Fett, let's say everybody kept it in black hole collections, didn't talk about it, kept their mouths shut. Well, they're 250,000.
We've been missing 90% of the information today.
Yeah, and their $250,000 piece would become worthless because nobody would know what the heck it is, right? If the information wasn't passed down. Now I'm using an extreme example.
Or you also have the other situation too. Somebody will overpay for something because this is the thing that drives me nuts. Every time these pieces come up for auction, the people that the press that goes on to do their articles, they keep getting the information wrong. I mean, I had one saying that they only made 20 of these rocket Fetts. Another one says they make 100. Well, yeah, there's probably 100 out there, but not of one type. The information is not being presented with a cohesive narrative. And so, I mean, because as a buyer, if I'm reading there's 100 of something, I'm going to pay very little for it. If I'm hearing there's 10 of something, I'm going to pay more. And as these things are hitting into that, $100,000, $200,000 territory, you really need to start having that education out there. Like if you're going to pay $200,000 on a rare coin, I mean, there's a lot of information they're going to tell you about how the coin was made, the dyes it came from, how variations on the dye. There's a lot of information, provenance, if this went from this collection to that collection to that collection. And that's kind of where we need to be with these pieces. So when you get someone paying that type of money, they know what they're getting. And like getting back to your piece has excellent provenance to it. And, you want to me, pieces like that are more valuable than a piece of, okay, here, I got a rocket Fett. Well, who did it belong to? Well, I don't know. Or I don't want to tell you. All you're doing is buying an artifact. But when you buy something that has provenance to it, you're buying a piece of history that goes to it. And then these things get more expensive and people keep doing replicas or fakes or whatever you want to call them. You need to know the provenance because sometimes that might be the only difference of really being able to know what you're getting.
Yeah. Well, it went from Kearns to you to another to.
Yeah, and there's another guy I'll tell you about privately. Yeah. So I have pretty much a very good provenance from it, and what I don't know is who sold it to Kearns, but it might have been Gus. I'm thinking it might have been Gus because Gus had a lot of stuff back then, or it might have. But I can at least get you back to Kearns, and that's a good point because everyone knows that the Kearns collection, the 9 Holy Grails. When he told me he was going to try and collect every rocket Fett known, I thought he was a little sunstroked, Yeah, right, buddy. But
kind of genius.
But boy, he went out there and did it.
Wow.
He went out there and did it, and So.
Well, I think we got a lot of info on the Fetts. I mean, we showed variants, we showed the card, we talked about the brief history of it. I don't think we need to go over anything else. I think this would be really.
Yeah, I think we got this pretty much covered there.
Yeah,
this was a pleasure. It was really great talking to you.
So I'm going to shut this down, and then we'll stay on though. I'm just
but you're going to stop the recording.
Yeah. All right, man.
Go for it. Let me know when to stop.
All right.
Bye.
Join the Collector Alliance for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to celebrate the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. On May 19th, we are going to be hosting a
virtual toy convention
and having Jedi items up for sale, including a Firing Fett. Subscribe through thecollectoralliance.com and download the app on Android or Apple today.